Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming back to our event today. And wow, do I have an exciting interview for you today with the co-author of the Plague of Corruption series, Mr. Kent Heckenlively, who is an attorney, a writer, a researcher, and co-author of this very, very popular series of books, the Plague of Corruption series. And I'm so excited to have you with us today, Ken. It's really amazing, the story and the timing of your work with Judy. So I'm going to let you tell people a little bit about the books you've written so they have an idea of the kind of research that you do. And may I just say that from everything that I've seen, one of the main reasons that you were co-authoring these books is so that your background as an attorney and a researcher, that everything would be sourced and there would be proof and documentation of all the claims, which are going to seem, for people who aren't familiar with these books, almost hard to believe. Correct? Am I correct in saying that? Yes.
So it's kind of funny because my friends are starting to call me the Stephen King of science stories. So, and I jokingly say, well, I don't know, Stephen King, maybe Danielle Steele. Okay. Yeah. But I'm becoming quite prolific. So our first book was Plague, and this was released in 2014. That was followed up by my solo effort, Inoculated, How Science Lost Its Soul in Autism, which was about the effect of the MMR shot on African Americans. This is, I think, is a really important book that I'm glad my publisher re-released this year in order to talk about how our CDC is devastating the African American community. Then the most amazing story, Plague of Corruption, which was released in 2020, in April of 2020, just a month into the lockdown, kind of the greatest, luck in timing, I think, of any book of the past 20 years. Yeah. That was followed up by Judy and I put out a book very quickly called The Case Against Masks, which you cannot get on Amazon because Amazon has taken it off, even though our publisher has a book called The Case for Masks, which you can get on Amazon, but you can't get The Case Against Masks on Amazon. However, you can get it from Barnes and Noble, but there's a caveat to that, which is Barnes and Noble will apparently not ship it to any store because they don't want to contaminate their employees with any ideas, but they will ship it to your house like it's some form of pornography. So it probably comes in a brown paper bag, okay? So Ben Garrison, the cartoonist, did the illustrations. He did just a wonderful job, a great, great guy. And then this book, The Case for Interferon, which is about an overlooked cancer medication from the 1980s. And what's really interesting is this book has received a preferred review from Kirkus Reviews, which is really difficult to get. In fact, they highlighted it in their magazine. So I jokingly say, this is my gateway book for, people who may be wondering about me. I have gotten one really good Kirkus review and about 4 ones that are so bad that I didn't even publish them. But so I can write good books that get good reviews. I just tone it down a little bit. Right. But it's kind of strange to me how I write this Case for Interferon book with an expert on interferon, and Kirkus loves it to the stars. Right. They highlight it in their magazine and everything, and I'm like, well, I'm the same writer. I'm doing the same thing that in this book that I do in the other books. Yeah,
it's interesting, the bias, isn't it? And and the censorship, with the mask book. incredible that Amazon would do that. Yeah.
So I said, I told you before, I had a funny story about the publishing of Plague of Corruption. So, what was interesting is that it was originally scheduled to publish November 5th, 2019. Okay. And I was kind of excited because that was the same day that the new book by Scott Adams was publishing, as well as the book by Donald Trump Jr., Triggered. Okay. And so I wrote this kind of funny article that's like, on this same day, 3 books are being published, but mine is the most important. Mine is going to be the biggest. And, I was just kind of playing it for fun.
Right.
And very quickly, I beat the Scott Adams book in terms of Amazon reviews.
Right.
And eventually, this now has more reviews than Donald Trump Jr.'s book. So, I don't have a cartoon strip. I'm not the president's son, but I'm beating the crap out of both of these guys. And I take that with a great amount of pride.
Well, it couldn't have been more timely, because the story of what Judy had done and her background with Fauci reads like a novel that somebody created that you wouldn't believe that could happen in real life, to me. The classic nemesis, right? I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, and I think the thing that I bring to it is I like to find the insiders, okay? I like to find the really smart people, because I feel like those who are inside will tell you the stuff that if you're on the outside, you could never imagine happening. Right. So I came to know Judy in probably 2010. What had happened was she had published groundbreaking research in the journal Science, which is the leading journal of original research. And what she had found is that this mouse retrovirus had somehow jumped into human beings, and it was being found in high numbers in people with chronic fatigue syndrome, which your viewers probably know is called yuppie flu, and looked upon as a fake ailment by career women who crashed. So a lot of misogyny around this disease.
Right.
And what was really interesting was Judy was interested in family studies, because she knew that these retroviruses can pass in families relatively easily, especially mother to child. Right. And so she was finding that a high number of the women with chronic fatigue syndrome also had children with autism, which is kind of where I come into the picture, because my daughter has autism. So she took 17 of these kids, tested them for the presence of this retrovirus, found approximately 86% of them, 14 out of 17, tested positive for the retrovirus, which was even higher than the numbers of women with chronic fatigue syndrome who tested positive. That was around 67, 68%. So, at the time I was writing for Age of Autism. And so that kind of gave me license to call up anybody I wanted to and interview them and say, I'd write an article about their research. And so I gave a call to Judy, and she talked to me for an hour and a half. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, this is a woman who is fearless. She doesn't care if she's going to get in trouble. She's going to tell the truth. We ended up having dinner at Autism One in 2010. And I remember saying to her specifically, you realize you're going to get into a lot of trouble, don't you? Because what she was saying, and this was speculation at the time, but well-founded speculation, she was saying that when a child is born to a mother with HIV, standard practice is that child must go on antiretrovirals prior to any immunization, because the HIV retrovirus hides out in the B and T cells of the immune system, which are exactly those cells that are stimulated by a vaccination. And so what she was proposing at the time is that, well, maybe XMRV is just like HIV. And these stories of parents whose children were normal prior to a vaccination, but started developing problems after a vaccination, maybe if we use the HIV model for XMRV, we're seeing the same thing. And I told her, you don't understand how much trouble you're going to get into for saying that. And I was actually saying, I'm happy to publish an interview with you, but do you know how much trouble you're going to get into? And I'd actually like to pull it back a little bit. And she said, no, publish it that way. It's the truth. It's what I think. This is where the research leads. And she had said, I am well protected because the people who run my institute are the biggest supporters of US Senator Harry Reid, who at the time was the majority leader of the United States Senate. And she said, I have great scientific support. I published with people from the National Cancer Institute and the Cleveland Clinic. It was basically the Cleveland Clinic who had discovered this retrovirus in men with prostate cancer. And so now they were just moving it over to chronic fatigue syndrome. And, last I checked, women don't have prostates. So, things may change, I may be told that women have prostates. I can't say that only men have prostates, but for now right. I can say only men have prostates. And so, lo and behold, 18 months later, she's thrown in jail for 5 days, never, no trial, no conviction, no nothing, just dragging her name through the mud. And that's when I said, we really have to publish a book, because that may be the only freedom that we have left in a media which is funded by big pharma. A lot of people don't realize that big pharma spends about $6 billion a year advertising in the media. They also spend about $300 million lobbying Congress, which is twice what the oil and gas industry spends lobbying Congress. So for people out there, mainly on the liberal side, who think like, oh my God, oil and gas is buying Congress. Well, I got a story for you. Big pharma's spending twice as much.
Right. Yeah, and this is where we get into the whole medical, industrial, congressional complex that we are fighting. And a lot of people don't realize that there's only 2 countries in the world that allow the pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV, correct?
Yeah.
And that's
us in New Zealand.
Yeah. And it has such an impact of control of the pharmaceutical industry over the media and the TV stations and all the media, because the money, they're their number one source of funds, right? The media's number one source of funds is the pharmaceutical industry. So they can do it, basically control the narrative.
Absolutely. He who has the gold makes the rules. So why don't we get any real investigation of big pharma? Well, it's because they're funding the media. Right.
So in that first jailing, where Judy was thrown in jail, what was the role of Fauci?
It's a great question. So one of the things that was going on is that it was quickly becoming apparent that Judy's research into XMRV was opening up some areas of inquiry that people didn't want to have opened up. So there were some researchers who had found some interesting things and suggested some interesting things. One of the things that was found by a researcher named Adi Gazdar, and I believe this was in 2010, 2011, is that when they looked at their own labs, and they were looking at labs in which they had passed human tissue through mouse cells. It's called like a mouse xenograft, okay? Because oftentimes in order to get these pathogens to grow well enough to study, you have to passage them through animal tissue, okay? So what they were finding is that this virus, XMRV, was in samples maintained in those same labs, but which had never touched each other, which meant that this virus could become aerosolized, meaning it could float through the air. This is the doomsday scenario. So they found in a lot of the labs that with samples that had never come in contact with mouse tissue, but were simply maintained in the same facility, they would be, rates of contamination were like 17 to 25%. This is huge. When they had, when there were facilities in which no mouse tissue had ever been used, they looked at the samples, no contamination with this virus. The other thing that was becoming really clear, and this was published in Frontiers in Microbiology, was an article called Of Mouse and Men, Origins of XMRV. They asked the question, not us, where did this virus likely come from? And their answer was the most likely explanation was vaccine stocks that had been used in order, that had used mouse tissue in their production. And what was really interesting to me, and I think what I really added to Judy's story, and this is my background, I'm an attorney, I'm a science teacher. I'm not a researcher, I'm a science teacher. You could say I'm an independent researcher, but I just think I have that analytical mind. And so I said, hey, Judy, where was the first outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome? And she goes, I don't know. I said, okay, I'm gonna go looking for it. And pretty much everybody in the field agrees that the first outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome happened in 1934, 1935 at Los Angeles County Hospital among 198 doctors and nurses who were working during a polio epidemic. And I thought, wow, okay, that's really interesting. None of the patients got sick, but the doctors got sick. So I started doing a little investigating. I found out that 300 of those doctors approximately received an early polio vaccine, which was the first polio vaccine that had used mouse brain tissue in its preparation. So here I got mice at the scene of the first crime. What's also interesting is, in addition to them receiving this early polio shot that was grown in mouse brain tissue, they received an immune system booster because they realized if you're challenging the immune system, we need to make sure it's strong. In some ways, I feel like vaccine people in the 30s understood more than we know than we now understand.
Yeah.
And that immune system booster was preserved in thimerosal, a mercury derivative. It was one of the first uses. So I was saying to myself, okay, everybody who's talked about the mercury, I got mercury at the scene of the first crime, and I got these mouse viruses at the scene of the same crime. And it was also kind of interesting to me, in another throwback to autism, is the first cases of autism arose during the same time. And it's always been there's always been this mystery because Leo Kanner at Johns Hopkins identified the first like 11 or 12 cases of autism. And what's really interesting is they were the children of people in scientific fields, and particularly some who worked in tropical diseases. And I also found out that mouse brain tissue was also used in the preparation of the yellow fever vaccine. And so I'm thinking, oh, okay, so if you're the kid of a researcher who's going to tropical places, does it make sense that, the junior gets a yellow fever vaccine before he goes to Haiti or something like that? Yeah, it does. So I think that understanding all of that was critical. And I think that that's kind of the balance that Judy and I have with each other, because she's a brilliant, brilliant woman. But sometimes she can lose people. She always
Right.
tells the story. She tells the story, better than I could, that, she gave this talk that she just thought was fantastic and covered everything. And this woman came up to her afterwards and said, "Dr. Mikovits, that's one of the best speeches I've ever heard." And she goes, "Oh, okay. Well, what about it really resonated with you?" And she goes, "Well, I didn't understand the science really, but the emotion with which you delivered it was just so impressive."
Well,
And I thought, okay,
yeah.
I'm a middle school science teacher and I'm an attorney. So, I'm thinking in terms of juries, regular people understanding things,
Yeah.
11 and 12-year-olds understanding things. So I think we've got a good balance, because I said to her, my job is to create a story that is understandable to people while also having the science be accurate and, up to date.
Yeah. Yes, and that's what you two have done. And I think one of the things, I haven't read all 3 books yet. I've read Plague of Corruption. And, what came through clear to me was that there's plenty of evidence that using animal tissue, not just mouse, but monkey, dog, and everything else, was clearly a problem. There was plenty of evidence that was causing a problem.
And what's really interesting is, my wife and I have been living this autism journey for 20 years. And, when I kind of stumbled upon maybe this whole thing of arguing about safe vaccines is counterproductive, because we're not really explaining it to people. And so when I came up with is it ever a good idea to inject animal tissue into human beings, because viruses from the animals can make their way into us and recombine? Same thing with aborted human fetal tissue.
Right.
Just, I completely understand the moral argument against aborted fetal tissue, and I'm totally there. But there's also a scientific case, because one of the things that Judy talks about often is, one of the things that viruses are really good at doing is opening up our genetic code. Okay. We think of our genetic code as completely, set. Okay. It's like in a lockbox. You can't get into it. But viruses pry open the lockbox. So what happens when you have the genetic code opened up, and then you've got this viral DNA there, that viral DNA will then go into your can go into your genetic code, causing problems, neurological problems, development of cancers, all sorts of problems. And so, I think that what I've really added to this is posing the question in the way that lawyers pose questions. Is it ever a good idea to inject animal tissue or aborted human fetal tissue into the bloodstreams of human beings? Because that's a clear question. People can understand it. And I think it's a reasonable question to ask. And, one of the interesting things that I did relatively early on, kind of when I saw that was how the question should be posed, is I went to Judy's longtime research partner, Dr. Frank Russetti, and I asked him the same question. And he's one of the founding fathers of human retrovirology. And I said, "Frank, is this a reasonable thing to ask?" And he said, "Kent, I asked that very same question when I was a young researcher, and I was told the human immune system is superior to any animal virus it might encounter coming back in that syringe." And I remember thinking then, that was the most arrogant scientific statement I'd ever heard in my entire life.
Right.
I thought, okay, I think my training as an attorney, we ask questions and then we listen to the answers.
Mhm.
If somebody could have given me a really good answer to this question, I would have gone on to something else. But the only response to our questions, now your viewers will know how much Judy got attacked after Plague of Corruption came out. I mean, we literally had like 7 or 8 newspaper articles in Rolling Stone, the Washington Post,
Right.
the New York Times come out within a week using the exact same, verbiage and everything. And not a single article has even mentioned our central claim, which is the use of animal tissue and aborted human fetal tissue in the creation of these products is creating a cascade of chronic diseases.
Right.
Nobody wants to touch that question.
Right. So they just attack and attack and try to demean, discredit in any way they can, but they never even address the central issue, which is obviously very, very true.
And you know what is most satisfying to me is that with these attacks from the mainstream media, the public isn't buying it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's how I know they're not buying it. So Plague of Corruption is the most popular virus book that you can find on Amazon in terms of how many reviews we have. So we've got over 6,000 reviews. The closest book to that has about 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So by a margin of 3 to 1, the people who are reading our books. We've got a 4.7 Amazon review with over 6,000 reviews. So the people are listening to what we're saying and they're educating themselves. And I switched from being a lawyer to being an educator, and I feel like that's my job. I'm gonna give the evidence to people and pose my questions, and I'm happy to debate anybody anytime about the claims, but all they do is say mean things about me. And I'm such a nice person.
Of course you are. And so is Judy. But as nice a person as you could get. But I think I must have seen 10 Judy interviews since this thing started. And you can see the emotion in her, and her heart come through, and the truth that she speaks. This woman, I don't think really knows how to disseminate falsehoods. I mean, I just don't think it's possible for her. She can only speak truth. She's one of those kind of people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and so one of the interesting things is, when you work with somebody on a book, you talk a lot and you get down to their
who they really are,
basic operating systems as a human being. And so I've said to her, Judy, why do you think you are this person that you are? Mm-hmm. And she goes, Ken, it's because when I was growing up, the greatest sin I could commit in the eyes of my mother was to not stand up to a bully. Mm-hmm. And so she said, there was one time, she was like 10 years old. They had just moved to Washington, D.C. She is, at the bus stop with her sister, and her mom drives by, and, one kid is bullying another. And she said, my mom drove by, saw I wasn't doing anything. I caught holy hell that night. My mom was just like, how can you call yourself a human being if you don't stand up for people? And so, she tells that story, and she says, okay, that was the greatest sin. I would get a thrashing if I didn't stand up to bullies. And, fast forward to her being like 16, 17 years old. She comes home, and her mom is remarried at that time. Stepfather's there, beloved stepfather. And so Judy is, got in trouble that day at high school. And so she comes home, and I guess there's a call from school that Judy got into an argument with her chemistry professor. And her mom says, now, Judy, why did you get into an argument with your chemistry professor? And she goes, she said, he hates women. He thinks women shouldn't go into medicine, into science. He's so sexist. And I called him out on it. And her mom was like so proud. And the thing that her stepfather said is, Judy's mouth gets Judy's body in trouble. And it would always be kind of the thing. But, you know, her mom was like so proud. Judy's mouth gets Judy's body in trouble. But it's because she tells the truth, you know, as she sees it.
Yeah. So before we go on to I wanted to ask you about her relationship with Fauci. But before we get into that, can you state unequivocally that in your opinion, the research shows that these vaccines using animal tissue are what has been leading to the problems with autism in children and all the other problems with our vaccines? And that I've heard several, that Dr. Tenpenny and others say that they're not anti-vaccine, they're anti-vaccines that are done wrong. And it's the animal tissue that is really one of the critical things that are creating the problems in our vaccines. Is that a
and see, I take issue with that. If the animal tissue is the very heart of a vaccine, I am anti-vaccine.
Yeah.
I am not manipulating the immune system to make it work better. I simply think that given everything I know, the use of any animal tissue or aborted human fetal tissue, or even, you know, non-aborted human tissue injected into the bloodstream is problematic. So I have no problem saying I am anti-vaccine, because I also feel like the whole anti-vaccine label is part of psychological warfare by big pharma against us. I mean, hey, I could be anti-slavery and that would be good. I can be anti-drunk driving. That would be good. You know, I can be anti, you know, child abuse. And so I can be anti-vaccine just as much as I can be anti-fentanyl.
Yeah, because it's killing people and hurting people. And lifelong damage in children.
Yeah. And so the shutting down of people by calling them anti-vaccine makes me so mad. So I kind of feel like, you know, you call me a bad name, I'm going to take that bad name. I'm not going to say, don't call me that bad name. I'm not that. No. Okay. If you called me, well, Kent is not anti-vaccine. He's pro-safe medical procedures. I'd go, oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll take that. You know, but if you call me anti-vaccine, I'll go, yeah, good. Now, I am. Let's talk. I'll tell you why.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So how does this roll with Fauci and what I mean, he literally put Judy in jail without any crime being charged, without any charge, right?
So one of the things that was really clear is that, so Fauci is head of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Okay. Right. So that means this research falls under his purview. Okay. And I believe one of the grants that she had was under his purview. So her research is an enormous problem for somebody like Fauci, because what it's saying is, you know, he's been there since 1984. So what's that? 36 years, 37 years. He's been in charge of this agency. This is all on his watch that all this stuff happened. So he's not interested in going down in history as causing the greatest epidemic of chronic diseases ever known to mankind.
Which is exactly what he should be going down in history for.
Yeah. So do I know everything that happens? No. Do I know, and have I heard from people, that Fauci acts like some mafia don who doesn't get his hands dirty? He hands it off to somebody else. But what I know is that Judy was essentially arrested for supposedly taking her own notebooks, which are her right under her job duty as principal investigator. And let's even go further. Let's say, well, okay, technically it should stay with the Institute. Well, you you give people copies of their research. So here we are, 11 years, 10, 9.5, 10 years post the problems. She has not been given a single page of her notebooks that she kept for 5 years. I say that this is a scientific crime akin to the Catholic Church walking into Darwin's study in England, stealing all of his notebooks, and then saying, prove your theory of evolution. That is the level of historic crime which has been committed against Judy Mikovits.
Wow. Wow. And then she sat in a jail cell for weeks before she finally got out.
5 days. It's
Okay.
kind of funny because one of the things that you find when
It must have been a long 5 days for her.
Well, but there were 5 days that she was held in jail. But then the quote terms, not the terms of her release, but what she was told by by her own attorney when they decided not to prosecute her. They said the judge actually said, you should not go on social media, and basically there were 5 years in which she was still technically under a cloud where they might charge her. And she was told to stay off all social media. So she'll say, 5 days I was in jail, 5 years I was basically in social media jail. And then some people will say things like, Judy was in jail for 5 years. I'm like, no, 5 days, 5 years off social media. In descriptions of my,
she was legally restrained from speaking out for years.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely true and absolutely accurate.
Wow. Amazing story. Well, what we want people to do is everybody needs to read Plague of Corruption. And I think your book too, the one on autism. I think those two books are really, really important for people to read. There's so much. I mean, these companies and their corporate lobbyists are so powerful. They have so much money that they control the narrative in this area so much. And I get in arguments all the time, even with my own kids about this topic. And they just don't realize that the narrative they're hearing is controlled by a massive money machine where the pharmaceutical industry and the media are working together to continue to push a narrative that just is full of lies and deceit and harming the people in this country and the world.
And also what I want to tell your viewers is our new book, Ending Plague, is available for pre-order on Amazon. It should come out probably around July.
Okay.
And what we did in that is it's kind of the story since Plague of Corruption, but it's got the added addition of one of our co-authors is Frank Russetti, who spent 37 years at the National Cancer Institute, Distinguished Service Award from the National Institutes of Health. He's one of the founding fathers of human retrovirology. He's kind of been behind the scenes, editing our books all the time, but he's finally decided that he needs to tell the inside story of these corrupt people in science, like Robert Gallo, for whom he was the lab chief, his own interactions with Fauci. And I'm just working on that chapter right now, and it's kind of amazing how these people have been able to make themselves basically unchallenged rulers of public health. And Fauci is, in my mind, one of the most evil men who has ever lived on the face of the earth, because what he has been doing has resulted in the suffering and death of millions.
I can't think of a better place to leave this interview with what you just said. That is a very, very powerful statement for everyone to hear. as everybody tries to put this man on a pedestal. And if anyone knows who he really is, it's you and Judy, with all your research and all your work and all your experience. So let's leave it right there. That was a very powerful statement and a great way to conclude a great interview. And I just want to recommend to everyone that they read these books. Ending Plague is available now on Amazon.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So Ending Plague, and definitely you got to read Plague of Corruption. That one is critical to in the thing. And then your book, the title of your book again. Let's give them that.
Inoculated, How Science Lost Its Soul in Autism. Now, this one is based on documents I received from Congress, from a CDC whistleblower, Dr. William Thompson. So, right. I mean, it's not like I'm some crazy guy saying I'm getting messages from angels. I'm getting these documents from U.S. Congress.
Yeah, yeah. And in my own experience, what has launched me into this arena a long time ago is people that I know personally whose children were absolutely healthy, babies that were healthy, nothing wrong with them. And a day or 2 or 3 after a vaccination, they were never the same again. Yep. And it's happened so much, and they try to cover it up. And to me, it's infuriating to me to see that happen. And yeah, so, and it was under Fauci's watch that all this was happening. So yeah, thank you so much, Kent. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming to this interview today. I hopefully you have learned something here that is life-changing and something that you need to share with others and get out there and get educated about this, because what we're experiencing right now with the vaccination, the COVID vaccination, is even, you guys are going to have to write another book just about this, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, what this thing is doing, just quickly, this, as I understand it from Dr. Madej and Dr. Tenpenny and others, is this is not even something that should be classified as a vaccination. It's real, or a vaccine. It's actually gene therapy, right?
Yeah, I agree.
You would agree with that?
I agree 100% with Dr. Tenpenny.
So just tell people what you think about this vaccine and whether or not they should take it.
For the same reasons that they should not take any vaccine. These companies have complete legal immunity for harm caused by their product, okay? If I told you, here, you know, come to my restaurant, but if you die of food poisoning, you can't sue me. You know, your family can't sue me. It's the same kind of thing. So what they're doing is they're programming your RNA to produce these spike proteins. They say that the effect is temporary, but they haven't done long-term safety testing. The other concern is there's something really strange about the coronavirus family. And let me explain it to you this way. Normally, if you get exposed to a virus, and this can be through a vaccine, because I never say vaccines might not deliver some benefit. But I say there's also problems with it, okay? So when you get exposed to a virus, whether naturally or through a vaccine, what your body should be doing is producing antibodies to that virus. That means that when your body is re-exposed to that virus, it quickly produces the antibodies and you don't get sick. Makes sense, okay? So when they put together coronavirus vaccines, what happens is the antibody response is generated and they think, oh, okay, great, protection. But what happens is when these animals and when children, because 2 children died in a vaccine trial with a coronavirus vaccine, they found that instead of the body responding properly, it overreacted and created this inflammatory cytokine storm, okay? So the fear is that this vaccine will maybe not have a lot of side effects initially, but next fall and winter, as other viruses start circulating, we are going to have injury and death on a scale we've never seen before. So I'm not saying I'm not saying it's gonna happen. I'm saying when they skip animal trials, when they don't do long-term testing, this is what's happened in the past. It's our concern for the future.
Well, one of the top pro-vaccine doctors in the world just came out and said exactly what you just said last week. And you know, so that some of the top vaccine specialists in the world are saying exactly what you're saying, but they're not getting any coverage in the media. It's just it's just all on in the internet and you know, the sub media, you know, the private media that you're seeing this. It's not being carried by CNN or anyone else. So it's a serious problem. Well, our time is up, but thank you so much for joining us today, Kent. It was an amazingly power-packed interview, and thank you very much. And thank you again, everyone, for coming today. And we'll see you on our next interview. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Clyde.